Welcome to the camera test of the year. We've got Samsung's just released S22 Ultra, which is promising more detailed photos, smoother video, enhanced stabilization, and a way more intelligent camera than the company has ever released before. But that's up against the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which since the day it launched has been the most refined, reliable camera system that you can get on a smartphone. So we've got 12 short categories, and through them we're going to find out if Samsung's done enough to finally take the crown and dethrone the iPhone. And the first category, before we dive into how capable each device is the equally important question of which one is more fun to use. And to give Apple some credit, they've made major strides with their iPhone 13 Pro. They let you choose a photographic style, so you can add your own spin. They made a new close-up macro mode for the first time, and they added cinematic video, which at the time the phone launched was the most well-thought-out implementation of this type of DSLR style recording. But Samsung's phone is really, really fun. And it's a combination of things. It's partly the fact that they've improved their cinematic mode. Not quite at the iPhone's level, but close now. It's partly the fact that the zoom on this phone is not just good, but extreme. It's partly the fact that this new screen is so bright that it makes broad daylight feel like child's play. And it's partly the software features. You've got things like Director's View, which lets you see all of your camera feeds at one time. Remaster, which can take any old photo of anything, and then use artificial intelligence to just improve it. Watch what it does to this low-res cube that I downloaded here. I was blown away by this. And then also auto framing, which is a new mode that can dynamically zoom the camera in or out to accommodate more or less people. I want to like it. The added movement it adds is nice, but I would more or less disregard this feature. It uses the weaker ultra-wide camera to start really far away, and then uses digital zoom to get closer to people, which is just a recipe for grainy footage. But one feature that I think is integrated beautifully on both phones is our second category, macro. You literally just bring your phone close to something and bam, you have an almost microscopic view of it. I'd say that the S22's macros look a little crispier, and the extra processing that Samsung does to shots gives them quite a nice color pop. But the iPhone can get even closer, which is also a big win in this category. So on balance, we can give macro photography a draw. Do you know what's definitely not a draw though? Zoom. Because like on paper, this Samsung might look really similar to last year's Samsung, with its almost identical setup of two telephoto cameras, one capable of 3x zoom, the other capable of 10x. However, thanks to the ability to now capture from multiple cameras at the same time and merge those shots for improved quality, and the ability to use AI to drastically clean up images after they've been taken, the S22 Ultra doesn't just beat, it completely spanks the iPhone's single 3x zoom camera. So here's an example, going all the way from the ultra-wide to the wide to 3x, 10x, where you can see the iPhone's image starting to die a little here, and then 30x. I am in awe that at 30x magnification, Samsung still looks this put together. Like, past Samsung phones, even though still impressive in this regard, would pretty much look like water paintings at the point where you hit 30x. And yet, somehow, this, I almost want to say, is a usable result. And if you want a good chuckle, have a look at the difference as I start zooming into the moon. The iPhone was practically having a seizure trying to figure out what to focus on and which lens to use. So yeah, this category goes to the Samsung. With the slight caveat that even though their camera app is smoother to use than it has been in the past, it's still not close to the silky performance of Apple's. Okay, on to category number 4. And as you can probably tell at this point, Samsung is killing the iPhone. And to be honest, it gets better with portrait mode. See, there was a time where iPhone portraits were unbeatable. Apple was the first to properly introduce this feature, and for a good 4 years or so, Android phone makers have just been scurrying around unsuccessfully trying to recreate their formula. I think Samsung is now their closest competitor, mostly thanks to one key new thing: impeccable edge detection. You can have the most complex, confusing background, and yet the S22 Ultra and its new improved artificial intelligence still seems to cut the foreground out so confidently and perfectly. That said, because Samsung's 3x zoom camera, which is the default camera used for portraits, is just not as good quality as Apple's 3x zoom camera, the iPhone's portraits just remain more detailed. And also, Samsung's portrait mode barely activates if you step more than 3 meters away. So overall, that phone only just escapes with a draw. Now, there's a bit of a saying in the movie industry that sound is 50% of the experience. And if that is true, then the ability of each of these phones to pick up speech is paramount to how good the camera systems are. Thankfully, I've done a lot of testing in a lot of different environments, and these are pretty much the best two phones for it. I would say the iPhone is slightly more natural in a little bit more than 50% of the occasions, but it's close enough that I think we can call this one a draw. And also, both phones have the not quite new anymore, but still phenomenal audio zoom feature, which means that as you zoom into things, your microphones can isolate the sound coming from whatever you're zooming into. But now we're on the subject of video, one of the other big improvements that Samsung talked about for this S22 Ultra is stabilization. So you know how most flagships use optical image stabilization, right? Which means that if I move the phone up, the camera itself will actually move a little down to try and counteract that movement. Well, what Samsung is saying is that the S22 Ultra's main camera has 58% more room to be able to move. And that's pretty exciting given that Samsung was already the king of stability. Unlike me. It's not a game-changing difference in practice. So if you're just leisurely walking around with these phones, they're both good, and that's pretty much all you need to know. Even if you try a gentle jog, which is probably the most you're going to be doing while filming on your phone, the iPhone is still fine. It's only when you're absolutely legging it, and you're also using Samsung's Super Steady feature, that's when you can tell that this phone has the ability to convert even the most manic hand movements into something that's somewhat presentable. So technically, yes, Samsung can stabilize better. Sort of, because you could just as equally argue that in cases like these, even with better stabilization, are you really winning? If it's coming at the cost of resolution, artifacting, and just a generally artificial look, would you ever use this extreme stabilization? And this brings me on to a bigger point, the quality of the video itself. Year after year, we see Android companies take the stage to announce huge improvements to video, but it never quite materializes in the end product. The good news is that the S22 Ultra is the most complete video experience that has ever graced a Samsung device. And it's not just the steadiness, it also now generally keeps up with the iPhone in terms of dynamic range, its ability to prevent the bright areas being too bright and the dark areas being too dark. And the focusing is spot on. 99% of the time you will get a pin-sharp subject, with nice smooth transitions as the cameras shift between what they're focusing on. But it's still not better than the iPhone. The primary difference being that the iPhone's footage just looks clearer. And my best guess is that this is the consequence of Apple having complete control over not just the phone hardware and the custom chip that's powering it, but also the entire software that they've engineered from the ground up to squeeze the most data out of these cameras as possible. And this advantage also translates to low light. Mind you, Samsung has noticeably neatened up their night performance, but you can see it, right? It's just missing that layer of crispness and confidence. The only time that it does win a video is when you want to zoom in 10 times while recording, which, whilst not completely useless, you know, I could see that being useful at a sports game or a show, it is a pretty niche scenario. And this brings me on to the other thing, which has been brewing on my mind over the last few days, and that's if I had to crystallize what the difference is between these two cameras in one word, that word would be balance. The iPhone has an incredibly balanced camera system. Like, even though you have 3 cameras on the back, 1 on the front, it never really feels like it. The way that Apple's managed to match these cameras in terms of not just color profile, but also quality means that you're never thinking, ooh, which one's my best lens? I need to make sure I'm using that for this shot. It just feels like one continuous camera, even as you move from ultra-wide to main to zoom. And this is what Samsung misses out on. Each camera here feels like a separate experience. And it's not just the slightly janky transitions between them, it's more that each has a different color profile, and each produces images with slightly varying quality. You know how I mentioned earlier that Samsung's portraits are let down a little by a lackluster 3x zoom camera? You never get that feeling with the iPhone. Now, it's not always a bad thing. The iPhone's intense consistency does make it a little boring by comparison, and the fact that Samsung has more variability in its performance means that when you are in a best case scenario, when you are consciously taking advantage of its strengths, like that 10x zoom, you can achieve something special. It lacks that effortlessness. And if I was picking one of these to give someone to shoot, say, a holiday travel vlog with, 95% of them would get a better end result with the iPhone. It's pretty clear where the majority of Samsung's time went though. Night mode photos. Every flagship has night mode, where you hold your phone still for a few seconds and you let it take multiple frames and fuse them together for a brighter shot. But Samsung's got a few extra things going for it this year. For starters, this phone takes 25% more of those frames to fuse together. it manages to take those frames within a shorter time period. Its camera has bigger pixels to capture more information, and then finally, more intelligent processing of the final output. And you can tell, or at least you can tell if you know what you're looking for. Samsung's night shots are very bright, and not just technically strong, but they also have a bit of character and vibrance that I think the average phone photographer is probably going to appreciate. And also, if you line these phones up on a tripod and point to the sky, it also pumps out crispier astrophotography shots. Not the best I've ever seen, but good. However, there is a weird important quirk that I should probably mention. For the S22 Ultra, Samsung has made all of the cameras, apart from the ultra-wide camera, wider, which feels like a very odd decision. Because like, when you're taking a photo of a person, they will look better if you're stood a little bit further away and you're using some zoom. But what Samsung have done is the opposite of that. You will actually have to step closer to them. And you might be thinking, well, if the camera's wider, then that's great, because I can fit more people in, but that's what the ultra-wide camera's for, and that's the only camera that they didn't make wider. The other reason I'm telling you this though is that Samsung's wider lens makes it much harder to compare detail between these phones. Because if I enlarge these shots such that one object is the same size on both, then I've actually zoomed in more on the Samsung because it was smaller to start with. All in all though, these phones trade blows. Sometimes I do think to myself, oh, Samsung, why you gotta go around brightening things that don't need brightening and creating unnecessary grain? But then other times I'm like, whoa, where did you come from? And miraculously, given that Samsung's flash module is like half the size of Apple's, it's actually brighter. It really does ward away the darkness and bring back so much texture into photos. And hey, if you want to brighten my day, then a sub to the channel would be flashy. And this trend, it also carries through to the daytime. I systematically prefer Samsung's look. Their cooler tones, their crunchier contrast, the way they slightly soften your skin imperfections. Their vibrance and brightening power of darker areas also seems stronger. It's not to the point of looking wrong or fake, just enough to give the photos some pop. The long-running caveat though with Samsung phones is that they take longer to capture. And it's tough to say whether that's because they need more time to process the immense amount of data from their 108 megapixel sensor, or if they're just not as well optimized. But the point stands, if you've got a fast object, you can expect some degree of motion blur. That's not so much of a problem when you're taking still posed photos, or if you're more of a vegetative subject like myself, but it can come back to haunt you in those semi-dim indoor lighting environments, because it introduces more time for everything in frame to just shift, even a tiny bit. I usually use the sharpness of my beard as a pretty good way to measure this shutter lag, and you can probably see the difference for yourself. One thing that I will give to Samsung though is slow-mo. Not that they've really innovated with it, it's more just that they tried really hard with slow-mo like 4 years ago, and then those features have just been carried forward onto each subsequent model. Both phones can record at 8 times slow-mo, for which I'd say they look pretty similar quality-wise, but then Samsung can just go slower, with bursts of 32 times slow-motion footage. Great to have the option, but I am surprised that Samsung actually allows a feature that looks this bad to exist on their 2022 hero phone. Okay, 2 quick sections before we decide who wins. The first being something that's really important to me. Selfies. I am such a natural. In fact, I've made it a habit to take a selfie in front of every single video backdrop we make. And the reason that I always use an iPhone for it is that even though the lights around me change drastically, it uses its understanding of what's what in the photo to still keep my face looking consistent. Samsung's still not quite there on that front, but I'm actually starting to prefer it as a selfie camera for other reasons. It's higher resolution, so as long as you have adequate lighting, you can see all of those little beard hairs, just how I like it, and you can get really deep, contrasty shadows that almost look like how I would actually edit my photos to be like. And then the other side of that coin is selfie video. But to be honest, for the same reasons that Apple wins when it comes to normal video, they also take it away here. To be fair, it's a very close battle, given that I think Samsung's front camera on a hardware level is better, but they're just let down by their software processing. So, let's have a look at the results. Samsung's won 7.5 categories, Apple's bagged 4.5. So, I almost don't need to tell you, the S22 Ultra is a solid improvement over the S21 Ultra. It's turned both portrait mode and night mode from a loss into a draw, and it's taken the already huge lead in zoom and just completely run away with it. However, what it doesn't do is significantly improve upon its predecessor's key weaknesses, namely video quality and shutter lag. And that puts me in a dilemma. I really enjoy using this camera. I love the punchiness of its photos, downloading random pictures off the internet to try remastering, and casually zooming into signs 100 meters away and realizing that I can actually read them. But for my uses, given that one of the things it does lose in is video, which is such a huge category for a content creator, this phone would actually make my life trickier. The iPhone is good enough that we actually use it interchangeably with our main camera every now and again. I wouldn't do that on the S22. So all I can really say for this comparison is that there is room for both of these on the market. To find out more about the S22 Ultra, I did a pretty detailed first look over here, or if you want to understand the crazy world of NFTs, that video is over here. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss,